the problems which the world is facing and move a couple of steps towards resolving some of them. India has earlier hosted several multilateral conferences. Recently, the NAM Summit of March 1983, the Commonwealth Games of 2010, India-Africa Forum Summit in 2015. But the G20 Summit, which is being held in New Delhi, surpasses all the previous events and summits in terms of its scale and expansion. As India is hosting the G20 Summit, and also India as president of G20, India's presidency will come to an end after this summit on 30th November. Formally, India will conclude its presidency of G20. But there is a heavy agenda, and a G20 Sherpa, Mr. Amitabh Kant, held a briefing where he said that the voice of the global south and developing countries will be strengthened, will find a voice in G20 declaration, and the New Delhi declaration is almost ready. Ambassador Sachdeva, if we look at these developments and we see the context in which G20 summit is being held, the world is polarized. So how can we hope for something very fruitful coming from this G20 summit, two-day summit on 9th and 10th? Your views on this?
Thank you. I think the event is extremely important, both for India and for the global context. Taking global context first, I would say that, as is clear, our humanity faces existential crisis after crisis. It is the panoply of challenges that we face, from climate, from global economy, from pandemic, war in Ukraine and elsewhere, tensions in South China Sea, and so on. We have seen that these negative events, these headwinds, have particularly affected global south, at least in two major ways. Firstly, the aid that they used to receive from global north has come down because global north has nothing much to give. They are battling their own recession, deflation, and collapsing economies. There's unemployment. There is after effects of pandemic, and there is Ukraine war. Secondly, the decline in global economy has been accompanied by decline in demand for commodities. So the commodity prices have come down, and much of the global south, particularly in Africa, used to depend on commodity exports. They used to import a lot of stuff like grain, fertilizers, etc. Cost of all that has gone up. Cost of oil is up because of disruptions due to Russia being the third largest exporter of crude, being subject to various sanctions, and so on. So this is the global context. Headwinds are affecting almost every human being. As far as India is concerned, we have performed in an exceptional way. While most of the G20 countries have faced headwinds with bowed heads and lower expectations, high unemployment, and so on, India has been a star performer with world-beating 7.8% growth in the second quarter of this year. So we have demonstrated the veracity, the competence of our policies. Our central banker has been awarded the best banker in the world award recently, and proof of this is in the G20 that world leaders are queuing up to come to Delhi and attend this important conference. So from the context, it's also quite clear that this is a major opportunity for India to up its game in the soft power and hard power. We can perhaps talk about it a bit later.
And also, the Ambassador Sachdev, as Mr. Amitabh Kant said, that the New Delhi declaration is almost ready. And we also know that Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping have given a miss to this G20 summit. But their representatives are coming. The Chinese Prime Minister is coming and Russian Foreign Minister will attend. So the references that the consensus is very difficult to come by, and the tensions with China, which India also has, But if this has been achieved, the New Delhi Declaration, as he said, is almost ready, then I think it will be a major achievement if India is able to cobble up the consensus, come up with a joint declaration which is acceptable to all the leaders of G20.
I would like to recall here that when foreign ministers of G20 countries met 3 months ago in New Delhi, there was no final declaration. But if there is a final declaration after the summit, it shows that India has succeeded in bringing down the barriers, creating consensus, and carrying everyone along. As far as absence of Russian and Chinese heads of states is concerned, I also note that they could have lowered their representatives' rank, but Foreign Minister of Russia is a consummate diplomat and he's very competent, having been in the job for more than a decade through the tumult. So he knows his business and would be able to steer his country's role. China could have sent lower level diplomats, but Chinese have also, while President Xi's absence has been speculated upon, but they have sent the second highest person in the ranking, which is the Prime Minister. They could have sent their foreign minister or even lower functionary if didn't want this to happen, or didn't they want, as being alleged, they wanted to disrupt it. I think there is some exaggeration in all these coverages and which need to be corrected. I would also
Yeah.
like to state here that we have achieved through Delhi Declaration, if that's final and as they agreed, to create a basis for compromise, which after a 1.5 year of Ukraine war, both sides are pretty clear that they cannot win it. This has to end through a political solution. And perhaps G20 Delhi Declaration would create such a basis where the two sides could further negotiate upon. And that would be a big gain. But then one should also add quickly that G20 is actually an economic forum. It is not a political forum, but it has acquired that dimensions partly because dysfunctional nature of the other fora, such as United Nations Security Council, such as WTO. And therefore, we need to use this forum to the best of our capacity, which India has done in a consummate manner. And one would like to here compliment our Sherpa and other stalwarts.
Yeah, I would like to draw your attention towards an article which the Prime Minister Narendra Modi wrote with his byline only yesterday, and unveiling the theme of G20, in fact, taking G20 to the last mile, leaving none behind. And he laid stress on Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam and the interconnected world in which we live and today. And he said that it means that our challenges across domains are interlinked, as you were pointing out. And India's G20 presidency strives to bridge divides, dismantle barriers, and sow seeds of collaboration that nourish a world where unity prevails over discord, where shared destiny eclipses isolation. So I think this underlying theme will be very, very visible in G20, a summit on 9th and 10th in New Delhi. But apart from this, there are several important bilaterals also towards which I would like to draw your attention and seek your comment. US President Biden is meeting Prime Minister Modi this evening, and it's a high-powered agenda where we can expect some progress on drones, on 5G, 6G, and there are a number of other bilaterals lined up. And in all, Prime Minister Modi said that he will have nearly 15 important bilaterals on the sidelines of G20 and also pull aside meetings with prime ministers of Canada and other leaders. So these bilaterals also hold an important position in the scheme of things, and there will be a major milestone as India, strengthens its bilateral ties with these countries with whom Prime Minister Modi will be talking to the leaders of these countries. So how do you look at these bilaterals also, which form an important component on the sidelines of G20 summit?
Bilaterals are actually the icing on the cake. While Delhi Declaration is going to talk about the collective wisdom, the policy initiatives taken by all 20 countries, it is very often the bilaterals which are far more prosaic, far more effective, and far more decisive in linking up the two countries. And India, as it seems, is going to use the bilaterals in a very effective manner. As you mentioned, more than 15 meetings are likely with various heads of states and heads of governments. And these may prove to be more decisive, more effective, as I said, and produce results which are more tangible. For example, we already have media coverage that President Biden's meeting with Prime Minister Modi may lead to supply initiatives that were announced in the June meeting that when Prime Minister visited Washington, such as drones and aircraft engine and modular nuclear power reactors, artificial intelligence related issues, and so on and so forth. But I would also like to add here that these meetings also produce cordiality and give a platform for the two leaders to connect. Secondly, these meetings presage the UNGA session in September, where most of the prime ministers and presidents and kings go and deliver their policy statements in front of UN General Assembly. So 15 days later, there'll be another opportunity to add another tier to this dialogue that would start now. Further, one would also like to add here that in a same bilateral vein, we are expecting the state visit by Saudi Crown Prince and Prime Minister to follow up back on back the G20 meeting. His country is represented at G20 and he is going to spearhead the delegation. He would stay back and complete the promised state visit to India, which was to take place last year before Bali G20 summit, but for scheduling reasons had to be postponed. Now, this is extremely important bilateral event, importance of which can be gathered from the fact that Saudi Arabia is India's fourth largest trading partner, and India is Saudi Arabia's fourth largest trading partner and second biggest market for its exports, more than $50 billion, thanks to the huge crude import that we have from Saudi Arabia. So we have a trade deficit of nearly $30 billion, which is second only to what we have with China. So we can work this over and create a situation where we can perhaps help Saudi Arabia in terms of its arrival at the global stage. Saudi Arabia recently has had various initiatives taken, including reconciliation with Iran and talks about US brokering an agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia have been swirling around. So Saudi Arabia is ready for the global stage, and this would be the first major visit by the Crown Prince since end of the ceasefire in Yemen and reconciliation with Iran. So all these indicate that G20 is not only important in its own right, but it has spin-offs that would justify the huge expectations that it has generated.
Yes, sir. Ambassador Sachdeva, considering the huge scale and reach of India's presidency of this G20, we hope that the summit will, as to use the words of G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant, will emerge as a strong voice of the global south and developing countries, where India has always stressed that world is one family, inclusive, decisive, ambitious, action-oriented G20 summit. And these elements, we hope that India's G20 presidency will have major achievements to show as G20 summit will conclude on September 10th. Thank you very much, Ambassador Sachdeva, for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on G20 summit and bilateral meetings, building bridges for global progress. The participants were Mahesh Sachdeva, former diplomat, and Vinay Kumar, journalist. This program was produced and presented